Thank you for joining and welcome to Lead Dev Bookmarked. Lead Dev is a global community of engineering leaders who come together to discuss all things leadership, teams, tools, and tech. Bookmarked is our monthly book club that takes place on the first Tuesday of every month. Our sessions cover an array of engineering and leadership books that our awesome Lead Dev audience can draw insights and practical experiences from. I'm Susan Bond, and I'm your moderator. I'm a former COO of a scaling startup and a leadership consultant. My specialty is tech leaders. You can find me on LinkedIn or everywhere else by using my name at Susan Bond. Today, we'll be talking about Transformed, moving to the product operating model with Marty Cagan, who is, I'm so glad that you've been willing to come back to visit us again. If you have questions for Marty, please pop them in the Q&A feature on Zoom. So just a little bit about Marty. Before founding the Silicon Valley Product Group to pursue his interest in helping others create successful products through his writing, speaking, advising, and coaching, Marty Cagan served as an executive responsible for defining and building products for some of the most successful companies in the world, including Hewlett-Packard, Netscape Communications, and eBay. Marty began his career excuse me. Marty began his career with a decade as a software developer at Hewlett-Packard Laboratories, conducting research on software technology and building several software products for other software developers. After HP, Marty joined a then young Netscape Communications Corporation, where he had the opportunity to participate in the birth of the internet industry. Marty worked directly for co-founder Mark Andreessen, where he was vice president for Netscape's platform and tools, and later e-commerce applications, and worked to help internet startups and Fortune 500 companies alike to understand and utilize the new emerging technology. Marty was most recently senior vice president of product and design for eBay, where he was responsible for defining products and services for the company's global e-commerce trading site. During his career, Marty has personally performed and managed most of the roles of the modern software product organization, including product management, software development, product marketing, user experience design, software testing, engineering management, and general management. Yeah, that's a array. As part of his work with SVPG, Marty is an invited speaker at major conferences and top companies across the globe. Marty is a graduate of the University of California at Santa Cruz with BA degrees in computer science and applied economics and Stanford University Executive Institute. Hi, Marty. I promise my speaking is going to get better. It's so great to have you here again.
Thanks for inviting me back.
I'm so excited. So let's talk about, why did you and your co-authors write Transformed? Why did you decide, and how is it different from the first two books, Inspired and Empowered?
Yeah, well, we started SVPG really to share the techniques of great product teams. And that was the purpose of the first two books. Inspired really shares the techniques of product teams, and Empowered, it tries to share the techniques of product leaders. But it's also true that from the very beginning, as soon as Inspired came out, there's been two editions of Inspired, and as soon as even the first edition came out, probably the single most common piece of feedback we would get would be that, yes, this sounds like an amazing way to work, way better than how we work today, but I don't see how it's possible for our company to change to work that way. We are so far behind that. And we've been hearing that forever. And this is really what my partners and I do, is help companies to move to this way of working. But, we're a handful of people, so we can handle a handful of companies. And so we decided finally to write a book on this, to share what we've learned about how to change. And, a lot of people, frankly, don't think it's possible to change. And that's probably the thing that spurred us on. There were so many people that are just, it's not possible. Don't even try to work like the best companies. It's hopeless. And, there's always people like that in the world. But, now with social media and stuff, they have a louder voice than they really deserve. And so we were like, okay, well, this is going to be our answer to that. And so the book That's why we wrote Transformed, was for
Mm.
that. It is different though. Instead of techniques for teams, it's much more about change techniques, really,
Mhm.
transformation techniques. The other thing that's really different is our earlier books are all about sharing the techniques of the best companies. So we have examples from all the top companies. But in this book, we wanted to prove that you didn't have to be a top company in Silicon Valley to do this. And so we made a rule for ourselves that all the examples in the book were going to be from outside of Silicon Valley, and they're from all over the world. They're from Brazil, they're from Saudi Arabia, they're from the UK, they're from the East Coast, they're everywhere else really in regulated industries, healthcare, devices, all these other kinds of things. So that we hope that will finally convince people that yes, it is possible. It's still hard, but it is absolutely possible.
Yeah, I noticed that array of companies from across the globe, and that felt really quite different from other books that I've seen, which have a much more narrow swath of companies that they might focus on. It's great. So, who is this book for?
Well, the first two books are clearly for product people. That's engineers, designers, product managers, and their managers, basically. But this book, of course, if you're trying to convince a company to change,
Mm.
they're the easy group, right? The hard group is your CEO, your CFO, your COO, your head of sales, your head of marketing, your head of legal, your head of compliance, all the stakeholders. So this book, Transformed, is the first one that was written for the full company. And so we had to expand the set of reviewers we had, and you'll
Mm.
see, it's so the quotes are from CEOs and from others from all across the company because they have to participate, and they also have to work. They're looking for ways to collaborate constructively with the product teams. So we had to talk about that.
Mm. Well, and so the title of the book is Transformation. So, like, let's start there. How do you define it, in this book? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, transforming is just the term we use to change. Of course, what's more interesting is what are you transforming from and what are you
Mhm.
transforming to? And so that was, I'll tell you the truth, for in our other books, we were very vague on this. All we said was, look, you can work like the best or you can work like the rest. Wouldn't you rather work like the best? Okay, we'll share that. But that's, not very precise. And so we needed a way to define, like, well, what does it even mean to work like the best? Who's the best? What makes them the best? So we had long sort of shared examples of what we consider the best companies because that was our advantage. We got to work with them early and we saw them develop, and we saw that yes, even though companies like Amazon and Apple and Netflix have very different cultures,
Mm.
if you look inside those companies at how their teams work, they're remarkably similar. And that those similarities, the way we see it, is there's a set of principles. We call them product first principles that all those companies believe. When you're building an iPhone is very different than if you're building, say, an e-commerce site or if you're building an entertainment system, but the principles are the same. And
Mm.
so we wanted to share those principles, and we call those principles the product operating model. We didn't want
Mhm.
to come up with a new term. You know, we could have tried, but it's very difficult to get a new term established. There were a couple existing terms, like you've probably heard people talk about product-led companies or product-driven companies, but we think those terms sound like a power grab. So we
Mm.
didn't like that. A few of the companies we work with use the term product operating model. And we like that because it's a conceptual model. It's not a process and it's not a framework. It's a conceptual model, which is really a set of principles that can be applied many different ways. And so we just adopted the term product operating model, which we refer to as product model for short. But that's so what we're talking about is how do you move from the way you've been working to this set of principles. Now, if you double click on what this means, I mean, at the start at the highest level, honestly, The easiest way to summarize it is moving from output to outcomes. Because
Mm-hmm.
basically waterfall and roadmaps, it's all about output. And we know how to do that. It's just not, that's the root cause of why, most of the experts say it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of roadmap items don't deliver the value companies expect. So that's not very good batting average. It has never been a good batting average. And in the best companies, we think they're much better than that. And the difference, though, is that the good companies are focused on outcomes. They're not focused on output. So at the highest level, it's about outcomes. But that sounds easy. It is easy to say, but how is it? What does that really mean to focus on outcomes? So when you double click on that one level, we define that as 3 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
Changing how you decide what problems to solve. That's really basically how do you decide what to work on? How do you decide what to invest in? This is how most companies do some sort of annual or quarterly planning process. And in good companies, we see those done very differently than how it's done in most companies. So that's the first level, changing how you decide what are the most important things to work on. Then once you decide to work on something, the second big dimension is how do you solve that problem? How do you discover a solution worth building? That's product. The first one is product strategy, really. This one is product discovery. This is saying, how do you discover a solution that's worth building? What that means is it's valuable, it's usable, it's feasible, and it's viable. That's what
Mm-hmm.
product discovery is. Those are the skills, really. And by the way, that's where innovation comes from, discovery. Pick any product that you consider very innovative. It's usually that's where they came up with it, discovery. And then the third dimension is, okay, you've discovered a good solution. How do you build, test, and deploy that product? So that 2 things are true. One is you're taking care of your customers. It's a solid product, but also you can prove outcomes because this is all about moving to outcomes. So when you deliver, you have to be able to prove outcomes. That means not only things like continuous deployment, but it also means things like you can't prove outcomes if you don't have instrumentation on everything you release. So the instrumentation, the telemetry, the monitoring, so that we know everything is healthy and so that we know how it's actually working. And of course, the deployment infrastructure. Do you deploy in an A/B test in order to prove the outcomes? Do you release things dark so that you can get things all ready for your customers until you're ready? These are the 3 big dimensions, and there are many. Well, there are 20 principles as we've identified them
Right.
that support those dimensions.
Yeah, we'll go a lot. This is so good. We'll go into depth in those. I'm curious about those 3 things, how we decide, how we solve, how we build. Is there one that you find most companies struggle with more than the others to really shift, or does it really vary?
It does vary. To be honest, all 3 of them are pretty hard for a lot of companies. I know your audience is a lot of developers in this audience. And, the truth is the third one, which is how you build, I thought that was solved 20 years ago. When
Mm-hmm.
companies moved to Agile, and I was very vocal about encouraging companies to move to Agile. The reason to move to Agile was to do these things. Small, frequent, reliable, uncoupled releases. Unfortunately, today, the world knows many, many companies call themselves Agile, but they release quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
That's not Agile. That's just marketing. That's BS, And so honestly, a lot of companies hide behind the label Agile, but they're not Agile in any way, shape, or form. So unfortunately, those companies that probably spent millions of dollars on Agile coaches and Scrum masters and product owners, and they're horrible in terms of product. I have to explain to those CEOs, yeah, unfortunately, you haven't done any of what the work you need to do. And so you need to get serious. And I point out to them, the good companies, they might not call themselves Agile. They certainly think that the rituals that most companies do are kind of silly, but they are doing releases many times a day, and they are truly empowered teams. So you tell me which one's more agile. So so even that one is hard for companies. And then, of course, most companies, if you've been working in the old models, there is no product discovery. Your stakeholders are basically deciding what goes on the roadmap. So they're doing that, and there's no real product strategy for the same reason. So all three of these dimensions are often new, and they're hard. But that's the difference. If you want to know the difference between what it's like to work in one of these good companies and what it's like, you already know if you don't work in one of those companies, then those three things kind of spell it out for you.
Yep, that's really great. That's so helpful. So, more about the model. Like, what are the four key competencies or roles of empowered products teams? You talk about this, and I thought this was really fascinating.
Well, yeah. So the first thing I'd emphasize is that these are new competencies when you move to the product model. Even though, and this is kind of what makes it messy, even though most companies have people by these titles. So let's start like, something you'll relate to, real tech leads. Real tech leads. I mean, we say that it's ridiculous that we have to explain it, but in most of the world, they do not have real tech leads. Their engineers are order takers. They build what they're told. They are not empowered engineers. But of course, and in fact, it's so bad in so many companies, they outsource the engineers, which is a non-starter, just a non-starter in a product company. So if anybody's company, on this call are outsourced engineers, I would say, you have to decide if you're serious about developing products. And then assuming you bring that in, when we talk about an empowered engineer, these are people that care just as much about what you build as how you build. So the point is a tech lead takes a much more active role in what the solution is. And that's, there's all kinds of great quotes. Steve Jobs was famous for saying, we don't hire all these engineers in order to tell them what to build. We hire them so they can show us what's possible. So that's what we mean by a real tech lead. Somebody who is front and center on this product team, side by side with a designer and a product manager. And that leads. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say too, just to go a little bit more on that too. It sounds like getting them more involved and earlier in the process, and also like equal. What I'm hearing is like equal partner in the process, whatever that partnership looks like, rather than order takers.
Well, absolutely. In fact, for a lot of people, the way they only understand what we mean here when I say, if the first time your engineers are seeing your product ideas is at sprint planning, you're not a product company. So that is not what we're talking about. So at least the tech lead has to be much earlier. Then, of course, I'm talking real product designers. I'm not talking just graphic designer. I mean a product designer that's skilled in service design and interaction design and visual design. So they're critical partner, especially if you're doing something that's user-facing or customer-facing. And then the third and the messiest for a lot of companies is real product manager. This should never be confused with an agile product owner, which is a role in a delivery process. This is a product manager, somebody who's responsible. They are a creator, just like a designer, just like an engineer. They are creating the product. The engineers, of course, are responsible for coming up a way to enable a solution with technology. So they're responsible for feasibility. And the designer, of course, is responsible for the usability, but the product manager is responsible for both the value and the viability of what gets built. So they're solving this together, side by side. You said it. Yeah, they are an equal partner. In fact, I tell this to product managers all the time. In a good product team, the engineers don't have to build what a product manager puts on a backlog. They don't. If they're not convinced this is a good thing to build, they shouldn't build it. And that might be because it's not a good thing to build. It might be because the product manager has not shared the real reason, the context. This is important to do. So we're talking about a real product manager, designer, and tech lead, and those three managed by real leaders, product leaders, engineering managers, design managers, and managers of product management. And those people, those product leaders, we just use the term product leaders for the managers of those areas. Those people really are critical because they are the ones who are responsible for not only recruiting these product team members, but coaching them in order to know how to do their job. And it's worth pointing out the idea of an empowered product team is you're pushing decisions to the team. They're not order takers, they're problem solvers. In order for them to solve problems, though, they need to be empowered, obviously, to solve problems, but they also need to be informed. They need to understand the strategic context. They need to understand the product strategy, the vision, the team topology, the overall of what teams are working on what parts, so that they could make good choices. And that's the other responsibility of the product leaders, is to create and share that strategic context. So those are the 4 new competencies. And there's existing competencies, things like test automation engineers and user researchers and data analysts and all these other roles that have existed, product marketing. But those 4 competencies, even when a company has people by those titles, they usually don't have this job definition.
Yeah, it strikes me that, there's this constant friction, at least in most of the companies I've been in, between product and engineering. It just feels like there's a lot of friction there. And I wonder if this model might help that because of making them more equal partners in the process rather than, you know, product starts and then engineering finishes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if that would ease some of that friction.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not in the product model, it is a completely different model. It's worth acknowledging that. So most of them truly don't have any kind of product manager. And most engineers, in my opinion, rightly believe there's just no value in those product managers. So
Mm,
that's, I think, the root cause of the friction. They just like, what's the
mm,
point? These people are
mhm,
making all these decisions. They have no knowledge on the things. This is ridiculous. And
mm,
by the way, there's a lot of friction between product managers and designers in that model too, in the old
mhm,
models. But in the model we're talking about, it's completely different. It's a different game we're playing with very different players we're playing. So
mm,
so the dynamics are different, and in particular, the dynamics are much more. You've probably heard people refer to the triad or the troikad, but product manager, designer, tech lead, they solve problems together collaboratively. Another great analogy Steve Jobs used to use is in a good team, it's like how you polish a stone. You have friction, and that friction is what generates such a beautiful result. We need that friction. You won't get that friction if engineers are told to just what to build. There's no friction there. If
mm,
if the designer is told what to design, there's no friction there. That has to be this friction. And that comes with psychological safety because you trust each other
mhm.
and the true cross-functional skill set. So not only when you move to the product model, a lot of times, in my experience, what I'm about to say is not very hard, but it is important. All these engineers that are used to being order takers, you have to sit down with them and say, your job is now different. Your job is to step up and figure out a better solution instead of just building these ridiculous features that people keep asking for and are not very good. You say it every time you're building it. You have to step up and help come up with a much better solution to that. And that's,
Mm.
there's always a few engineers that are like, I just want to be told what to build. But most of them are like, yeah, this is why I became an engineer. I want people to love my work.
Absolutely. And you say in the book that the product managers is the most difficult new competency to establish. Why is that?
I mean, it's a messy one. There's a number of reasons. If I had to pick one, it's
Mm,
usually I hate to say this, but I think it's a very unfortunate, unintended consequence of the move to Agile over the last 20 years.
mm,
Agile has probably done more to damage product than anything else I could name. And it wasn't intended. In fact, I think the intentions were very good. The problem is, isn't it interesting to you how we have these agile coaches? They don't try to teach the developers how to code, do they? Have you ever seen an agile coach try to teach a developer how to code? Have you ever seen an agile coach try to teach a designer how to design? Yet they think they can teach a product manager how to product manage. And
Mm.
they do that because all they're focused on is the delivery process. The emphasis there is on process. And so they're like, yeah, we train these product owners, and they're being trained literally by people that have never created products before. They have no idea what they're doing. So it's the blind leading the blind. If they were just training them on the delivery process and said, this is on top of your real job, which we can't train you on, but you need to know, just like they don't try to teach engineers to code, you just have to teach the engineers, here's how a sprint works, or here's how Kanban works, that kind of thing. That's very straightforward. Trying to give somebody a certification and send them out to say you're the product owner of a team, that is deadly. And so the result is that today, product owner is so polluted as a title. I tell people, if you have that on your LinkedIn profile, you are vulnerable. You're a target. In fact, I had a CEO in Europe tell me he had 200 product owners in their organization, and he told me he was pretty sure he could lay off all 200 and nobody would notice the difference.
Wow.
And that's a pretty sorry state. And in fact, I think, if they would notice the difference, and the developers and the designers would be happy. So
Wow.
that's not a good endorsement. So that's what I mean by this is the one that requires the biggest change, because these teams are missing a real competency. Because unfortunately, if you're going to empower a team, the designer and the engineers don't have the context in order to solve for value and viability. Those are like, viability means you have to know how your product is marketed, know how it's sold. You have to know the compliance issues, the legal issues, the privacy issues. Show me a designer or engineer that also knows those things. They're very rare because they have their own jobs. It's hard. So the question is, if you have to solve these problems in ways that your customers love and work for the business, you need these skills on your team. So this is why it's really, for a designer and engineer, it's more of an upskill. And,
Mm.
and most people can do that. For a product manager, it's a hard reset. It's a very
Yeah.
hard reset.
Yeah, I bet that makes sense. How much does this model impact the culture or change relationships in the company? What's the impact on that?
Well, the consequences are pretty big. In fact, if you're trying to, let's talk, the basic idea behind an empowered team and the product model is that you staff these cross-functional teams so that they can come up with solutions that customers do love enough to buy, right? And works for the business. And it's the works for the business that's often the hardest part. That means that the product teams are now equal partners with the stakeholders. And that's a very different dynamic. In a typical, before a company transforms, the stakeholders are the ones calling the shots.
Mm.
And the feature teams are basically just there to serve the business. And then that's why they don't have product managers. They just don't. And they are order takers, but in the model we're talking about, they need these. So it changes the dynamics, and it's,
Mm.
in fairness to the stakeholders, if you introduce them to a typical product owner, there is no way they are going to trust that person. Well, what they'll say, they tell me this all the time, they have no clue about the business. They have no clue about our customers. I would be clearly irresponsible if I was to trust this product owner. So the product owners don't deserve the trust. They haven't earned the trust. But in a product team, a real product team with a real product manager, they are set up so that they are worthy of that trust. They can earn that trust, which is what we need.
Well, yeah, and it strikes me that, as you've said, tech leads, product designers, product manager, product leaders, these are all terms we already have in the other model. And so people might be thinking, well, I'm doing it, right? I have that title. I'm good to go. How do you help people understand how do maybe engineers or other people who are trying to convince somebody that what they have is not the same? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That
and that,
difference.
and that is the real challenge is that in fact, I warn people. In fact, this is right in the front of the book. I say one of the most common reasons transformations fail is because you're going to read about these competencies and you're going to think you already have them.
Mm-hmm.
Just what you said. And because we've seen that time and time again. And we can point out afterwards that, look, in fact, we've been writing about this a lot lately, product management theater, for example, where they have the title, but they're not doing the job. So HR is part of this theatrics too. It's like, yeah, you didn't change the job description. You didn't make sure that the people that are in the job are qualified for the job. So this is kind of what happens. It's not hard to see the difference if you point it out. The harder question isn't that. The harder question is a company willing to change? Are they willing to go through the pain to change? Because I will tell you, and I tell them all the time, not all product owners will make it to real product manager. Not all will. Some of them because they don't want to, and some of them because they're not willing to put the work in, and some of them because they just don't have the raw ingredients.
Mm.
But and so you have to be able to deal with that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, listen, change and transformation. I mean, company change is hard because it's not just like changing one thing. You're really looking at changing the way many units or people operate. That's really what, if I read this correctly, it's a pretty big change.
It is a very big change. That's exactly right. And a lot of people do call it cultural change, and there is cultural implications, like how are decisions made, that kind of thing. But for the most part, I would consider, the most of a culture is a little different, and this is
Mm,
just you're changing how you solve problems, you're changing how you do your planning and how you build
mm,
your product. So it's more about the techniques and the principles we use.
mm. That makes sense. So, you say that the product model, rather than less leadership, it's better leadership. I think some people might be surprised by that or, wonder what that means. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, because that's another common, confusion is people think, okay, we're going to empower our team. So what that means is managers just need to back off. And believe me, a lot of people have tried and they find that that's actually not true. In the
Mm,
best product companies, and I'm talking Apple and Amazon and Spotify and Stripe and Netflix, they have the best leaders. It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. They do. Because when you empower people, you need strong leaders in order to, first of all, to coach them. That's their first responsibility. If your manager can't show you how to be a great product manager, they're failing right out of the gate as a manager. So right there, they have the skills. They need to have those skills. And then second, if they're going to empower you, they need to be able to provide you with the strategic context. And that means product strategy. That means team topology. And these are hard skills. So, and there was just coincidentally a great article shared online trying to make this point. It was written by a product coach I like a lot named Judd Anton, and he's a longtime design leader and product leader. And anyway, he's sharing the analogy when 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 you're in a mountain climbing analogy. I'll let listeners look up that article, but he makes this point really well that
mm,
to help a manager's job really is to be very active, not to micromanage, but to empower with the context they need and the coaching they need.
that's great. So, is there anything about the model or the book that we have not talked about yet that you think is really important to share?
Well, we talked about a lot there. I mean, it's a pretty good sized book, so there's a
It
lot to
is.
talk about. I mean,
It is.
the two big things we haven't talked about is
Mm,
I think it's very important to people because look, anytime you said yourself many times already this last hour is a lot of change and it's hard change. So one of the things people need to motivate them for the change is they need to see that other companies have done it, that they're not, that it's possible. And so there's a dozen case studies through the book showing how companies made these changes and importantly, what were they able to do once they changed, once they transformed. And so that's a big part of it because that's kind of the carrot. That's the prize, is to be able to work like these companies are able to work. The other thing is that in every single transformation I've ever seen, there are always objections. There are
mm,
always people, like a CFO that will say, I don't understand how we're going to fund this, or I don't understand how we're going to run it this way, or how are we going to have accountability, or HR saying, well, we'd have to change all our job descriptions and we don't want to. And there's hundreds of objections. And to be clear, I'm talking about legitimate objections. I'm not talking about, there's
mm,
always people that are just, I hate change. And so we know that's different.
right.
We're talking about people who say, look, I'm willing to change, but you've got to address this issue. Until you can show me how this issue is addressed, we can't go along with this. And that's why one of the biggest sections of the book is dealing with objections. And it talks about objections from the board of directors, objections from the CEO, objections from the CFO, objections from compliance, objections from the product teams themselves, objections from sales, from customers. So you have to get all these objections out on the table and show how we address them. And so a lot of people have told me that the two favorite parts of the books were the case studies and
Mm.
the objections, because the objections gave them the words to answer the objections that come up. So we didn't talk about those, but I think those two things are important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, dealing with objections is always so important. Like you said, sometimes it's just sometimes objections are like, I don't like change, but a lot of times they're real objections, and people are like, well, wait, but this changes this. How do we address that then? So, yeah, I think those are really great. So, my last question is, what surprised you about writing the book, or maybe in working with companies around this? What's the most surprising thing?
Well, I don't know. I'd say writing the book wasn't so much of a surprise because we had been doing this. We just had to sort of
Yes.
document it. But since launching the book, it's been very interesting to sort of watch people's
Mm,
reactions. Because, a lot of people very publicly had gone out on a limb and said, I don't think it's possible to change. And then all of a sudden, there's this book out there with a dozen case studies of all these people with their real names, not like pseudonyms or anything like that,
right.
saying like, "Yeah, well, we did it, and so I guess it maybe is possible." And so it's been really interesting to watch the community at large deal with that.
Mm,
And
mm,
I think what we've seen is that I mean, I couldn't ask for a better response to the book as far as like everybody's happy with the number of sales and all the reviews. All this is great. But the book did back into a corner quite a few people that had been declaring it as impossible.
mm,
And so uh, some of the people just go quiet. I think I wish those people would just read the book, but I'm pretty sure they won't. That's not going to happen. And but it's funny because some of them, all they do is they are like, oh, well, I don't think they look for other reasons not to do it.
mm,
Like, oh, well, the book talks about enterprise software, it talks about, this, but it doesn't talk about this. And so it's not really
mm,
relevant to that. They're just, the
mm.
truth is, if you're looking for reasons not to do something, it's always easy to find. So
For sure.
that was probably the most surprising thing is the people in the community. You can really kind of see which people are sort of emperors with no clothes.
Mm. Okay. Oh boy, we have like, I'm going to get one quick question in here. I'm going to make this real fast, Marty. A major takeaway that my manager has from the book is the product leader should be choosing the opportunities. Can you give an approximate level of scope that this is referring to?
Yeah, it's we wouldn't necessarily frame it that way, but that is what's going on is it's moving from the decision. Remember I said of the three dimensions, the first one is changing how you decide which problems to solve. This is what the questioner is referring to. And it's basically moving from the stakeholders, each sort of defining, to a more holistic view of what the company needs to focus on. Now, politically, those product leaders have to do this collaboratively with the executive team because if it's just viewed as one to the other, then you're obviously going to have some politics going on. And the book does talk about things like transparency in a product strategy so that it's not viewed as a product leader's personal agenda. But the question was about what's the level of scope. The scope is basically the same level it was before. It's like, what are the big problems we should solve? Now, maybe the questioner was also asking, because the other thing that stakeholders do is every stakeholder is just trying to run their part of the business. And so they always have a lot of these little things which we call either business as usual or keep the lights on. Every company usually uses one of those terms, or there are some similar. And they might be thinking that a product leader has to define those keep the lights on, and that's not relevant. The stakeholders are identifying these keep the lights on things. So every product team basically is there to solve one or two hard problems a quarter, and they keep the lights on for the business units as well.
Thank you so much. Another question came in, and unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. But thank you so much for joining us during the session. It was really wonderful to have you, Marty. Rashika Tulshian will be our next guest, joining us on May 21st to talk about her book, Inclusion on Purpose. Thanks again for being here.